How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're going to be talking about this week in cEDH. I'm going to be going over the last week of results that we had in the pre-Spider-Man / post-Semi-Blue metagame, including the first weekend of the 2026 Topdeck Circuit being live. Points were able to be earned this past weekend to qualify for the Topdeck Invitational. So we're seeing players start to get back into the grind, start sweating it out with their favorite variety of Tymna decks, and trying to get those precious top deck points. So today I'm going to be going over a little bit of the past week of events, some of the silver to gold size stuff. There were no massive events this past weekend, but we're coming up on some of the first big ones. I'm going to be going over that, some of the decks and commanders that stood out, talking about the rise of Semi-Blue, which has just exploded in popularity and become such an awesome thing. I've played it at some events, running into people playing it at events, and people asking me about it has been absolutely awesome to see. Just people absolutely gravitating towards such a cool new archetype. And I'm also going to be talking about some of the most interesting Spider-Man cards, because that will be legal this week as we have the pre-release coming, which will be happening by the time you're seeing this. And Spider-Man cards will be legal for tournaments this weekend, so they might be having a bit of an impact. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below what cards you're excited about, what you're going to be playing into this Topdeck Circuit. Are you going to try to qualify? But I think with all that being said, we can go ahead and hop into it.
Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try.
As of this weekend, we saw Topdeck points go live, meaning that if you want to qualify for the Topdeck Invitational, you can play in events that are part of the circuit, bronze, silver, gold, and earn points based on your placement. And so this was the first week of that new circuit and people out there trying to get some points. So I'm looking at events that are 32 plus. There weren't too many that were 60 plus. And also the gold cutoff got lowered to 50 plus. So events like Dumpster Diamond Days with 58 players would qualify as gold. But I want to look at the silver ones too, just to have a good look at the stuff this weekend. I don't know if these ones on Friday qualified. I think the points went live Saturday, but I might be wrong. But there were some other events on Friday too. But looking at the stuff from the weekend, it is incredibly Tymna heavy. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I know this one, I was at this event, so I know this one was a TnK, and I believe this one was Kennen. So we have 12 out of, I think, 18 events on Saturday and Sunday that were won by Tymna decks, which is disgusting. It's obviously time to ban Kennen and Rograk because they're clearly power outliers. You guys know I'm kidding. So what we saw is people sweating it out and playing Tymna decks and having very good success with it. TnK right now specifically, although this was a big weekend for TnT, and we also saw another TnK, but Tymna Krark, which is pretty exciting. But just a big weekend for Tymna decks in general, and there's no reason to expect that to literally ever change ever in the history of the world, because it hasn't for the past 9 years. So at the larger events out of these, it's kind of tough to look at stuff that's like 30-ish players, right? Even when I attend them, I don't usually like covering them. But at the 50 plus, we had TnK take it down at BalloonCon. We had TnK take it down here. We had TnK take it down here. We had a Kennen win, a TnT win, which I might actually take a look at this deck list because there's a couple cool things going on with it. And I did get to play against this one, not this past weekend, but the weekend before when I went up to the Gathering Place. Malcolm Vile won a smaller one, but it is mostly Tymna or bust, at least for the first weekend of the new Topdeck Circuit. So this is the winning deck list at the Commander Invitational Qualifier at the Gathering Place, which was one of those larger events of the past weekend. This is a Tymna Thrasios list that has a couple cool card choices in it that is leading it to actually have a bit of an identity. We've been talking about TnT struggling and the move into more cradle focused decks and kind of needing a bit of an identity to not just get totally overrun by blue farms, arguably higher card quality and better win conditions. This list on the Cloud of Fairies, which has become pretty much a staple in these deck lists, even if they're not leaning too crazy into like tree farm style token stuff. Taru is just a card that we kind of expected to be a staple and didn't quite take off at the start of Final Fantasy, but we're seeing a lot more people try, especially with how popular it was at the Invitational. Psychic Frog, this is the first inkling that we get that there's something else going on here. Pretty decent Tymna card. It's evasive. It's not really good to block it ever. Draws you cards just on hit, and it overlaps really well with Brewmaster, Graveyard Focus Energies, and Razaketh, which is what we're doing. We are Razaketh TnT, which is an archetype that people really expected to see play after the bans last year, but didn't really have a big resurgence, but we are seeing it here. Now, just in the creatures, we see not like a million slots dedicated to enabling that, but at least a few, right? Well, in general, running a lot of creatures lines up very well with Razaketh. We're going to have more bodies to sacrifice to tutor. Psychic Frog can be an enabler to get cards like that into the graveyard. Hazel's Brewmaster also does overlap with Razaketh in that you can Brewmaster plus Razaketh to make a food token that has the Razaketh ability to pay 2 life, sack a creature, search your deck. In general, though, the rest of it is just pretty high card quality stuff. We are on the Reanimate, help enable that strategy, and Reanimate just a generally powerful card in a creature-centric format, which even though it's all T and K, we do get to be, right? Even them, they run the Ranger Captains and other, the Bowmasters that get pinged off and stuff like that. Demonic Council is definitely not a card we've seen a lot of in Tymna Thrasios decks, but if you are looking to churn through your deck a little bit more, be discarding stuff to your Psychic Frog, just entombing things, it is a card that you can enable more easily. This is usually a card we see in the Mardu list, like your Kalias or your Rog Size specifically. The rest of this pretty normal stuff that we expect to see other than the Life Death. But Life Death is a card that works on both sides to help enable Razaketh / Reanimator strategies. This is very old tech when Razakats was a real archetype that was, a thing that was seeing a lot of play, where you can turn all of your lands into creatures to then sacrifice them to Razaketh and have tons of tutors to give you just overwhelming ability to push a win attempt. And then in a pinch, you can use the card Death itself to actually reanimate your Razaketh or another creature that you would like to get access to. The instance we don't see much in terms of uncommon choice and outside of Entomb, which is a card we expect in a reanimation focused deck list. We are on Abrupt Decay and Gifts Ungiven, which there is no Sevrek for piles for. Some decks can do like Gifts and or Intuition piles with Savine's Reclamation and the Devoted Druid stuff, but here we do just get to run it as a card that tutors some stuff to hand, to put some stuff in the graveyard, and we're able to utilize both of those things, right? Have a pretty good high card quality card in general, even if you're not working through the graveyard, and once you are working through the graveyard, it's even better. Artifacts, the main thing that stands out is that we are on Active Soul Cauldron, which also overlaps phenomenally with stuff that we're doing in this deck, right? We are putting broken creatures with activated abilities into the graveyard, like Razaketh, and it gives us good overlap and stuff we also get to do is like put a Ranger Captain underneath it and make a bunch of our creatures into Ranger Captains. It's just a pretty good card in general, and especially when you have a broken I win the game button to put onto it as well. It's great. Incidental Graveyard Hate is great. Just a card that does lots of powerful things. And then enchantments, we're on the Survival of the Fittest, which overlaps with that plan as well. And then Animate Dead as another cheap effect to reanimate creatures. 27 lands, of course, we're on the Cradle. We are on Mistrise Village as well. Shifting Woodland, 4 mana Razaketh, it's pretty good. I think this is a pretty cool list. If I was going to play TNT, probably look something like this or the more Cradle focused decks, but because I already play Rogthras, I would probably do Razaketh because I have only got to ever do that in Rogthras one time, and it's not something you normally get access to. But it is very, very powerful to have that I win the game button on an axis that can be relatively hard to interact with. But this weekend was also another weekend where we got to see a little bit of Semi-Blue come in. I know at the event that I attended, one of the players that I went down there with, Justin, was playing his Vile Thras list that he top forward with. There's also a Dargo Thras Semi-Blue list that top forward. In general, that deck has really caught on. And I don't want to talk too much about Semi-Blue because I did a whole video on it that you can check out. And I covered it pretty extensively in the last God of Commander video. But it has just exploded in popularity. Since that last video, I even followed up on what I said I'd do because I had so many requests to do it and created a Semi-Blue Discord. And we're at, probably by the time you see this, 500 members. This Discord has exploded. We got people talking about different cards, going over what happened at their tournaments, getting that great whale roll if you top a gold level event. Which has been a fun thing to introduce. And people talk about all different kinds of builds with the Bant decks, the Simic decks, Sans Black, Sans Red, going over their deck list, where we have things like people trying Omnath versions, different takes on the Rogthras ones, Helga, Atraxa, Vile Thras, Dargo Thrasios, which looks like a really exciting one to get to try out as well. Loot, just tons of different stuff. Kenrith, all kinds of different options. People just really discussing this wild archetype in cEDH, and it's been awesome. It's so cool to see how much joy people have got out of getting to try something new and just completely recontextualizing what they think of as cEDH and just throwing mana at the table and, seeing if they have an answer for it. It is awesome. So I've tried Tevish Thras. I played that at an event and with a little bit of interaction. It felt okay. It wasn't that Semi-Blue pilled, so that one was just whatever. Rogthras has obviously been a really powerful option. And I think Vile Thras is maybe the one that seems the most appealing to me. You get crazy cards like Incarnation Technique, stuff that I've kind of gone over. And it's just felt very good and looked very good. But Dargo is one that's really exciting to me too. I know Cobblepot started, I think was the first build of this, and then I got to see it at an event where I got to top 4, though I didn't get to play against it. But this card just opens up some broken synergies. I think it has some low floor in terms of card quality issues with just running Dargo cards, which is normal, but the ceiling on what Dargo can enable in a deck like this is so crazy. Cards like Fanatic of Ronus are very easy to enable to tap for 1,000,000 mana. Flamekin Herald gives your Dargo Cascade, which is pretty freaking sick. Your sacrifice loops kind of enable things like Spinner of Souls, which can dig for more creatures, kind of similar to the way that a Radagast can. Cards like Emoti, also giving your commander Cascade and having Cascade themselves. Haragast becomes a lot more reasonable because you have this big emerge threat that you can kind of cheat into play. Your normal commander spells, I think, are mostly only good, like Genesis Storm, Echo Storm, stuff like that, are mostly only reasonable in Ralgrak decks. They're really not good in like the Vile Thras decks, for instance. But also with Dargo, you can cast Dargo, 3 times a turn on its own and just super enable these cards to be absolutely absurd. So I think it's another one that gets to do that. Obviously pairs very well with cards like Eldritch Evolution. Food Chain can be a really absurd option. Earthcraft can be an enabler. You can do it with like Evolutionary Leap if you have a forest into play. You just have lots of powerful options with like your Relic of Legends to tap down a Dargo, sacrifice it to something. And then a really exciting one in general for Semi-Blue that I didn't think about before was Possibility Storm, which is whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, they exile it, exiles cards from the top of their library until you find a card that shares a card type with it, and then you cast that one for free, and then you put the card that you were going to cast on the bottom of your library. So you just totally randomize the ability for people to play. This is like a chaos card. But in Semi-Blue, you just cast a spell and you find another spell and you just barely even care. Like if you're making mana, you'll hit something else. If you play a cheap creature, odds are you're going to spin into something similar or higher mana value. And it just really disrupts the table's ability to actually have meaningful game plans while you just continue to cast your nonsense spells. And it doesn't affect like your Cascade stuff. Like you could cast a Genesis Storm. The first one of those will get replaced with a random other sorcery, which are all pretty high impact anyways. But then you still get all those copies. So it's just really cool option. These decks in general are just getting a lot of eyes on them now, and people are really trying to tune them, find different builds for them. And if you're interested, come join the Discord. And it's even gotten some other exposure on non-cEDH channels as well. The channel Distraction Makers, which you might be familiar with, did some coverage talking about Semi-Blue, going over kind of roughly what it is and the kind of angle it attacks cEDH from. They have a different perspective where they don't come from a pure cEDH background and are mostly like a game design focused channel, and honestly kind of have some odd takes on cEDH in general, but it is interesting to hear their takes on the format, and I like hearing from people who aren't just fully entrenched in cEDH and all about it. Though I do think they get a bit wrong, and I go over like a lot of random details in a comment that I put on here. I'm not going to fully go through here because a lot of it is just kind of niche stuff or just coming from a different perspective in the format. Though I will say, if you watch this video and haven't watched my stuff talking about Semi-Blue or read some of the stuff in the Discord or gone over the original articles, I would look at those and not just go based purely on this, but they do give a good general overview of big mana strategies as a thing in cEDH. Their conclusion that this needs to be addressed and maybe is like an objectively bad thing to have in your format, I think is crazy talk, actually. Probably the one thing I'll quote myself on here. It's very reactionary to see a new archetype emerge in a format that has just been the most homogenous thing in Magic. I don't think there's been a format more dominated over time by a single archetype than cEDH has been, and be like, yeah, we got to deal with this. And that's the thing that I've seen in general. I think a lot of people view these lists as goofy and that they don't deserve to win because they're just throwing mana at the table, and it's kind of lame that they win and they're not being smart and sitting around Minoristic Study. I just think that sucks. If you lose, you lose. And if you're playing this deck and you don't win, you did your best. But that's just what an evolution of a format should be. It should include people experimenting and try really goofy stuff like this. And in general, people who are like, ah, man, I hate these guys' cradle decks. We can do something about them. It's crazy talk. It's been like less than a year that they've been dominant, and still Temnicrom is the only thing to do in this format that actually consistently goes freaking insane in terms of results and conversion rate. Which other decks are doing well, but Temnicrom is still the best thing to do, and it doesn't even try to use your guy's cradle against you, or have a way to get rid of it. So that part of it, and thinking of this archetype as like a negative thing or dumb and just, oh, they just cast a big casual spell, I think is kind of silly. And I think if you're a player who feels that way, also maybe reevaluate and think about the perspective of people who enjoy these decks and also who want something different. It's not that often we get this radical context shift of what can be cEDH, whether you think these decks are here to stay or just kind of a fad that'll be answered by X, Y, or Z. I think it's really cool, even if this is like a failed experiment, experiment, that it's an experiment we got to have, and we got to see people really try to take almost a 60 card idea of what deck building can be in terms of actually building your deck to be an archetype on its own and not just, X mid-range pile looking to assemble 3-ish combos or something like that. And just actually building your deck entirely to do one thing. And I think it's really cool and cool to see them cover it, but asking to get better answers printed for Apex Devastator in a format where people already can barely win the game and like 30% of games are a draw, I think that's a little bit silly. I think this archetype is awesome, even if we all end up losing with it and, none of us do well, which a lot of us have, thankfully. And there are some new cards that I think are going to help this. And I think that might be a time to take a look at what we got coming out of Spider-Man. Now, taking a look at some of the cards from Spider-Man, this in general is a very weird set. It's a very small set. I think it's 188 cards. It was planned to be something like Assassin's Creed, like 100-ish cards. And to me, at least, it seems kind of clear that a lot of this set was kind of thrown together. If you heard us talk about this set as we kind of looked forward to it on the podcast, we were really excited for this set. This is actually probably the set this year I was most excited for. The thing that we're closest to and we're really looking forward to this getting expanded on because it's so rich and pulling from so much. And it outside of its impact on cEDH, which I think is like, it will have some. This is like the worst set that's been released since I started playing Magic. I think this set is absolutely terrible. So many of the cards are just throwaways of iconic characters who will never get another Magic card of them printed, and they just have this random text that won't even be decent and limited. Like, it's just not for anyone or for anything. I think this is a lazily thrown together set that feels entirely soulless. You look at Final Fantasy and you look at Avatar and it looks like those sets just radiate joy, and it looks like this set was made in a sweatshop by people who hate Magic and hate Spider-Man. There are some cool cards in it and there's stuff I'm excited about, but overall, my outside of cEDH assessment of this set is that it is maybe the worst thing ever. It is shocking that something like this can come out of the company that made Final Fantasy and are making Avatar and made Edge of Eternities and are just on a real roll this year other than Aether Drift, I think, which was a very weird, kind of the last hopefully hat set in terms of just throwing a theme on Magic. But I think you guys are here mostly to hear about my cEDH stuff. I do love talking about Magic sets and design and stuff. If you want to hear me talk about that, if people would actually watch it, I would love to talk about that. But right now we're going to talk about how these cards are in cEDH. Black Cat is one of the cards I'm most excited for, primarily for a semi-blue application, because it gives the non-red decks, and even the ones that are running red, a pretty powerful option to cheat in. Specifically gives like the Sultai-ish decks an outlet like a Tali. So for 5 mana, you get a 2/3 that when it enters, you look at the top 9 cards of target opponent's library, exile 2 of them face down, put the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. You can play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast it. So it mana fixes, you look at the top 9 cards and you get 2 of them. So really similar to like a Praetor's Grass style effect, but you get so much selection. I'm actually excited for this card even in those red decks because it doesn't have to be a full all-in payoff, and it lets you have a really flexible play pattern potentially, right? These decks don't really usually run like your Fierces and your Swats and your Force of Wills, blah, blah, blah. But you look at a blue farm deck, look at the top 9 of their cards, odds are you're going to find something interactive and maybe something proactive, or a decent tutor or whatever. So you get potentially access to a lot of different things that you don't normally get. And the mana fixing is really nice. Being able to actually get lands from other people could be, relevant. Take someone else's Cradle, obviously, can be good. And just in general, I think you're getting a lot of selection out of a pretty reasonable cost, especially for big mana decks. And you also do get to do the Atali thing. Like if I'm playing a Tevish Thras semi-blue deck, I get to exile everybody's decks and play all of their cards out of their deck, which is pretty nice. It's a pretty cool option to get to have on a creature specifically. I think this is just a pretty cool card. I get it looks expensive for like a normal deck where the top end of their curve is an ad nauseum, but in these kind of decks and maybe a couple others, I think it will be a pretty cool option. Electro Assaulting Battery is probably the card that just slots in the most freely into decks that were already running things like Burgi. For 1 red, you get a 2/3 flyer that says you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases in. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, add red, and when it leaves the battlefield, you can pay X. When you do, he deals X damage to target player. The last part, not too relevant, although, maybe you could go infinite and kill people and loop him or something. But primarily, this is another mana battery style card, similar to like a Burgi or a Vivi, though it also lets you take the mana with you, right? Like if you do a big Jessica's Will turn where you don't quite get there and you just get to sit there with your red mana and pass the turn and keep it up as long as Electro is there, on top of also making you the mana. I saw this in a Ral list recently, played against it. It looked pretty strong. I think in Ral, other lower color red storm decks is pretty interesting. The double red pips could be an issue in terms of getting it down in higher color decks. Like I don't think that Rogsai would like this over Bergie, primarily it being a deck that also runs lots of artifacts, like 20-ish artifacts that this doesn't trigger off of. But it is a card to think about in any of those red-centric Storm strategies. Flash Thompson, Spider Fan. For 2 mana, you get a 2/2 with Flash that when it enters, you choose one or both. Heckle, which is tap target creature, or Hero Worship, which is untap target creature. So the primary thing people immediately look to when they see this card is for Sisay. This is a tutorable legend off of Sisay that ETBs can untap target creature like your Bloom Tender or Faber Elder to get you another Sisay activation. It just does a lot. It's also reasonably castable. It having flash is really nice. We were seeing people play Hidden Footblade. Still is pretty nice to just flash in and have a sudden Sisay activation, or a cheaper way to work your way up. Like sometimes you can't quite get the Derevi, and this can get you one extra color and an untap on that Bloom Tender to go the Derevi, to go get Deadpool, to go get the win. Other decks that this might appear in, I'm not so sure. There might be some stuff in the Bant pie in general that looks to do something with this, but Sisay players will definitely be testing it, and it might end up slotting in there pretty permanently, at least for now. Norman Osborn, this is probably the coolest commander of the set, in my opinion at least. This set gave us MDFC cards that also can transform. So on the front side, we get Norman Osborn, which for 1 and a blue is a 1/1 that can't be blocked. And whenever he deals combat damage to your player, he connives, which you draw a card, discard a card, and if it's an online, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. And for 1 and Grixis, you can transform him only as a sorcery. And when you do, you get the Green Goblin, a 4-mana creature, because you can also just cast it as Green Goblin instead of Norman. With Flying and Menace, spells you cast from your graveyard cost 2 less to cast, which is already kind of hot. And then he has Goblin Formula. Each non-land card in your graveyard has Mayhem. The Mayhem cost is equal to its mana value, and Mayhem means that you may cast a card from your graveyard for its Mayhem cost. If you discard it this turn, timing rules still apply. So what this means, if I have a Green Goblin and I crack my Lion's Eye Diamond, the cards I discard, like say I discard a Wheel of Fortune, it will have Mayhem, which means for 2 and a red, I can cast it because I discarded it this turn. It basically tracks the way it entered the graveyard, and if it was via discard, then you may cast it for that Mayhem cost. The Mayhem cost is going to be 2 and a red, and Green Goblin will say it costs 2 less because it's in your graveyard, so it's going to be for 1 red, I get to cast Wheel of Fortune from my graveyard. Now, I'm not going to get to infinitely cast it just because it was discarded this turn, right? Just because I discard Lotus Petal doesn't mean I get to infinitely do it. It basically is going to look and see how it got there. So if I cast it from the graveyard and then it goes onto the stack into the graveyard, I can no longer Mayhem it. But what this does do is have some pretty strong synergies with any graveyard/discard centric stuff. Your Underworld Breach stuff already just gets cheaper, right? Even if you're not Mayheming it, those cards from your graveyard are just cheaper. Your Yawgmoth's Will, stuff like that, are just more powerful. There are a couple cards that look powerful with Green Goblin, Attunement being the main one that kind of stands out as a card that hasn't really seen any cEDH play, but gets to do something really cool with Green Goblin, where you return it to your hand, discard 4 cards, and draw 3, return the Attunement to hand, discard itself, and then draw 3, and then you, for 1 blue, get to recast the Attunement and do it again, and kind of sort of Ancestral Recall, but it's more like a Faithless Looting Recall type of thing, and just churn through your deck for 1 blue mana, which is really, really powerful. It is very cheap to get down, right? It's a good Mox-Amber commander, Fear, SWAT, all that good stuff. It's in amazing colors, obviously, in Grixis. We've seen other Grixis commanders recently, like with more of a mid-range / synergistic slant like Kefka, kind of take off. Green Goblin, I think, could easily slot into there as a cheap option that you can flip when you get the mana and gets to do cool graveyard synergistic stuff. It doesn't get you card advantage in the traditional sense outside of through synergistic stuff, discarding cards and playing them from your graveyard. But I think this one is a really interesting one to keep your eyes on and is potentially going to be very, very powerful. This is a card that just reads like it has a home, but I don't know where it is. So Peter Parker's Camera, which must be one of his mini cameras because it's not legendary. For 1 mana, you get an artifact that enters with 3 film counters on it. And for 2, and tapping it and removing one of those film counters from it, you can copy target activated or triggered ability you control and choose new targets for the copy. So obviously, this pairs well with really powerful ETBs, right? You could copy an Atali ETB or a Cloud of Fairies or a Great Whale, anything like that. Triggered abilities like Storm, I guess you could copy, doubling up your Ranger Captain crack, stuff like that. You could even technically double up like on a fetch land. Sisay activations, all kinds of random stuff that you can do. When you see a card like this, the more you utilize it, the more you'll see other things you get to do with it. And it's at the cheapest mana value we've seen. It's really similar to like a Stronic Resonator, but it's just a little bit cheaper. So where this ends up, I don't quite know, but I do know that 2 mana to just repeatedly copy your thing on a 1 mana artifact, you can grab this with an Urza Saga, stuff like that, will probably find some home and is something to look at, but I'm not quite sure exactly where it's going to land at. We got another flip commander here in Peter Parker, Amazing Spider-Man. So for 1 and a white, you get a 0/1, but when it enters, you create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. And then for 1 in Bant, you can transform it as a sorcery, and you get Amazing Spider-Man, which 4 mana, vigilance, and reach. Each legendary spell you cast that's 1 or more colors has web slinging for Bant, which means you can cast a spell for its web slinging cost if you also return a tap creature you control to its owner's hand. So I don't know if this thing is going to work as a commander. It definitely could. You get to do some mana cheating with other big legends. I've seen people talk about it in semi-blue strategies. One thing you get to do, which is kind of fun, is cast Atraxa or Bant, right? You just have a mana dork, get Spider-Man, spend Bant mana, boop, mana dork to hand Atraxa. Because it does let you cast your commander. Amazing Spider-Man doesn't have to be your commander. It just says legendary spells have web slinging. Web slinging does not have to be cast from your hand. So it does have some pretty cool stuff. Web slinging in general is a keyword that seems pretty interesting. Any cost reduction stuff could be cool. And there's lots of creature tapping shenanigans with Earthcraft you can get up to. And we're going to go over some other web slinging style stuff. Bant monsters to cheat into play. I don't really know, and they have to be legendary too. So I don't know if that's quite going to work, but anything that can reduce like, a 6 to 10 cost creature down to 3 mana is something to at least think about. Spider-Punk's probably the card that people, first saw and got, big eyes about at this set. I think I even talked about it already, but just to cover everything here. 2 mana, 2/1 with Riot. Other spiders have Riot. Spells and abilities can't be countered. Damage can't be prevented. This is kind of close to a Dosen style effect, but in red. I think this is worse than Dosen. It does have other synergy stuff you get to do, right? Like it can kind of do like the Veil of Summer trick where you can jam your own spells into your own Vexing Bauble and they can't get countered. But it doesn't stop people from casting spells, so people can still win on top of you or silence you when you get too far and that uncounterable, and then they get to go to their turn with this. I think ultimately, outside of really low color options that don't have something like this already, like, they want another defense grid style effect, but that doesn't exactly shut the table down. It's a thing you could see. Ultimately, I think this is just a card that has a lot of casual appeal, and I don't think it's like insane, but will probably feel right and have some powerful stuff that enables in the right decks. I just don't think this is a card you just get to slam in every deck and just jam in there and, get to do it willy-nilly. Spider Sense is another web slinging spell for 1 and a blue, or for web slinging blue, you can counter target instant spell, sorcery spell, or triggered ability. No activated ability, so no countering of Ranger Captain cracks, things like that. But you can counter a creature ETB, something like that, for 1, just for a blue if you web sling it. You have like a tapped dork or a rogue wreck or whatever, you can just spend a blue and do that. So in those kind of decks, the creature decks with like your Springleaf Drums and stuff like that, Earthcrafts, whatever, those slots for 1 mana interaction, like your Louis Suave Sacrifice and the Rogthras style decks, are getting pretty tight. I don't know if this is better. It does have some fun upside of like if you do manage to get a Cloud of Fairies and get a turn cycle and tap it down, then you could return this to hand and it'd be like mana positive and let you enable other things. How often that upside will come up, I'm not sure, but that is something this card could do, and it's a card that will find a home somewhere probably, but I don't know that it's like super broken, but it will have really high upside turns. And the 1 and a blue cost, just 1 extra generic to actually do the thing, isn't too bad. Still counters most scary things out of normal decks. Supportive Parents is an enabler for web slinging. For 2 and a green, you get a 3/3 that allows you to tap 2 untapped creatures you control to add 1 mana of any color. It is like half of an Earthcraft that's a little easier to enable, no basics required. It enables the cards like Spider Sense and this next card that we're going to go over, Spider-Man itself also. So I think it could be somewhere. You have to have a pretty wide board. With this on its own, it nets you back 1 mana with like this and a rogue wreck, right? It can tap itself and add a mana. It gets around Summoning Sickness. There might be something there. It's going to compete with the Cabbage Merchant, or maybe they both go in the same deck because they don't technically compete, but they're at similar mana values and kind of do similar things. So this might be something in tokeny strategies. You do a Chatterstorm, you can get, it could be a mana positive Chatterstorm. This is just another one to think about, and if you're trying to enable some of those web slinging cards, it can also be really helpful in doing that. And one of those cards that isn't technically web slinging, but basically is Urban Retreat, which is a tap land that taps for Bant mana, and you can spend 2 and return a tap creature you control to its owner's hand, as part of the cost. So you put this card from your hand onto the battlefield only as a sorcery. This can enable some Aboro Breeze Caller style combo lines, where you can return a creature to your hand, put this into play. You know, whether you return a like a Cloud of Fairies, for instance, cast the Cloud of Fairies, make the mana, Breeze Caller, the Urban Retreat back, and play it. I know it goes off with Earthcraft in that regard, where you could have a creature, Earthcraft and Cradle, play the creature, tap it down through Earthcraft, put Urban Retreat into play off the creature, and that it's like a higher Cradle count, and it's kind of a build your own Breeze Caller and like a Yoshi Thrash list that's on Earthcraft or some other effect to do it. You could also maybe do something similar with Relic of Legends. If it was not only as a sorcery, I think this card would be super cracked, or if the land got to have some kind of way to enter untapped or get fetched or whatever. As it is, I don't know if it's quite gonna line up that well, but maybe if you do run enough enablers with your Relic of Legends and your Earthcrafts and your supportive parents, then maybe it gets there. It does enable some combo lines, and it is very unique effect on a land. That is going to be it for today. Let me know what you're thinking about the current cEDH landscape, what you're going to be playing if you're trying to get into the Top Deck Invitational, doing that grind, and what deck you're doing it on. If you're excited about Semi-Blue, make sure to go join that Discord and join the conversation on how we can push this archetype forward and what's the most fun deck to build. And let me know what Spider-Man cards you're excited about. With all that being said, though, thank you so much for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.